This week on Inside Olympia, we continue our in-depth look at public education in Washington State with Elementary Principal of the Year, Cathy Sork. How is she making a difference in young lives? What are the ongoing and emerging challenges she is encountering? And what does she want state policymakers to know and to do to help schools like hers?
From the TVW studio, it's Inside Olympia with host Austin Jenkins.
And welcome to Inside Olympia. This week we continue our deep dive into the state of public schools from the perspective of frontline staff. Last week we spoke with Washington's Teacher of the Year. This week we meet the state's Elementary Principal of the Year. What is her secret sauce when it comes to running an elementary school, creating community, and meeting the needs of students? What are the greatest challenges she's facing? And what does she want budget writers and policymakers to know? Joining me now, and for the full hour this week, is Washington State Elementary Principal of the Year, Dr. Cathy Sork from Dorothy Fox Elementary School in Camas. Welcome to Inside Olympia. Great to see you. Congratulations on this honor.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Let's just start with a little bit of your background before we begin. Dr. Sork has been principal at Dorothy Fox Elementary for 18 of her 24 years in educational leadership. She says her job is to help students grow, laugh, stretch, and move toward a bright future. She organizes her school around empowered student leadership and deploys visual thinking strategies to engage students' both visual and cognitive skills. Her superintendent says she leads with heart, and Clark County Today reported that Dr. Sork is often praised for fostering a nurturing and inclusive environment in her school. So that's my version. Why don't we hear your version? Tell us a little bit about how your path into education to becoming a first assistant principal and then a principal, and then we've of course got to talk about the fact you've been at this one school for 18 years, which is unusual. But what was your journey like?
Yeah, so I'm a product of the Washington Public Schools, grew up here, went to Washington State colleges, come from a family of educators. So it's something I always knew. If you asked me in kindergarten what I was going to do, I was going to be an educator. When I hit high school, that's when I really had the opportunity to be lifted up through the student leadership programs of our state. So I was a little shy. I didn't see myself as a school leader, and was sought in an appointed position by someone who saw that potential in me. And I got to serve in the student council. I got to attend our state leadership camp. And that really was a turning point for me to build my confidence and to see myself as a leader. And then I ran for office and continued down that path. But that's really when I knew not only do I want to be a teacher, but I want to be an educator that leads systems and as a school principal. I started out as a middle school math and science teacher and thought I was going to be elementary, but that's just where I got placed for my student teaching and loved it. Loved middle school kids and started being an assistant principal. I think if I had any regret, it would be to teach longer because I just love teaching. But then I had a wonderful mentor that gave me advice that said, that'll make you a better leader if you still love the classroom. And I found that, I think, to be true. And then, so I had a chance to be an assistant principal at the secondary level and then come to my school as a building leader where I never saw that I'd get to be there this long. Yeah. And I really see that as something I'm so grateful for, to have the longevity in a single community.
So it's always hard to talk about being honored and to sort of turn the light on you and say, but when you think about why you have gotten this recognition and how you hope to use the platform, what's at work here? What do you think it is about your leadership that drew the attention and earned you this recognition?
Yeah. Well, I think because of the experiences I've had, it allows me to feel so grateful for where I am. I can see that the grass I'm standing on is so green, and I pick the position I have because it brings me joy. You know, what a wonderful thing in life to be able to pick a job and feel like I'm contributing to my community. But I stand on the shoulders of a lot of others, including a family of educators who inspired me as building and school district leaders themselves. And so, there are a lot of people that deserve this recognition. I wish it could be spread more readily because there are so many people that work hard and pour themselves into their school. But I get to be in a place where I get to surround myself with amazing educators who are just just fierce about meeting the needs of kids. Our parent community are involved. And when you get to be in a school like I do, you get to build on success and you get to find things that work. I never want to be that leader that gets stale or does things because that's what you've always done. But I'm in a community that celebrates innovation and a creative idea. I get to share leadership amongst the people that I work with. And I've also had the opportunity to mentor other new principals, which I think allowed the light to shine on me a little bit. But I wouldn't say I'm more deserving than someone else. I just had the opportunity to have this recognition, but I share it with hardworking principals across our state.
What is it, how do you want to use this position, if you will, this honor as Elementary School Principal of the Year? When you think about sort of the platform it gives you, what message do you want to deliver? What light do you want to shine on both successes and perhaps challenges in the K-12 space today? What's your message?
So the principalship matters, and what principals do and their commitment makes a difference in the impact of a school. And that, I think, can sometimes be lost in the shuffle. The retention rate of people, 1 in 4 principals don't get to stay in a school traditionally more than 5 years for a variety of reasons. And so I'd like to be able to send that message to our community and our government leaders that school leaders are important. They're worth the investment. They work hard. They're passionate about helping each and every student get the education that they need in their school, and that with the right resources, I do feel like we can make a difference in the achievement of every kid in that school. And there's a lot of research that's really coming out that backs that up. But it can also be a job that's fun, that is filled with hope, especially working with the younger students, where communities really are involved. If you can offer that invite, we're on the same page as families. We want what's best for each and every student. We want them all to have an equitable education, and I think the principal is key in being able to help make that happen. But they need help. They need support. In order to be able to be enticed into the profession, and then to be able to be successful in all stages of their career.
How you have the benefit of some perspective, both having been at this particular school for 18 years and then in the profession for some number more. How would you grade the state of Washington in 2024 when you think back on your career and at key and pivotal moments for public education in the state, including the McCleary years leading up to a Supreme Court mandate that legislators fully fund public education? How are we doing as a state when it comes to resourcing public education, especially coming out of COVID and with some years now in the rearview mirror on McCleary?
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel the support of our state. I'm pleased to work in a state of Washington that has such strong constitutional language that shows that's of value in our community. And I do not envy legislators trying to make decisions about limited funds and where they go. That's a very difficult position because there's so many authentic needs in our state. But I do find it challenging at times with certain populations. So I would give our state, I'd give them a high ranking order because they have a very hard job, as we all do, and I can feel that support. But I also can see the challenges. Funding in regards to students served in special education, for example.
That's an ongoing issue.
School districts have been saying that for a while, but that's real. And we have kids with great needs at this time where our resources seem to be dwindling. I know that the state budget needs to vary for a variety of reasons, but I am concerned at the percentage of the state budget going to education. Would like to see that continue ebb and flow to reflect the strength of the language in our Constitution, because we need to be able to have the support to meet the needs of each and every kid and make sure every kid across our state has an equitable access to education.
Have you seen any improvement on the ground in terms of special education funding coming to your school in recent years, given that the legislature has been at least incrementally investing more?
I think yes. That's why I said why I would give them high marks. I can see the effort that's being made. I know that they value kids in our state, but and in hand, I think we're getting more skilled and diving into better practices to support students, particularly in special education. I think that we have done some excellent things with the resources that we're given, but I think the needs continue to rise and are outpacing the funding that we're provided.
So I'm also interested in more of a kind of microcosm here of so that was sort of a systems question. What about at your school in particular? When you think back to when you became the principal 18 years ago versus the school it is today, how does it look different?
I mean, definitely when it comes to the resources that I have available to me to direct at a building are quite small. I come from a school district that doesn't have a lot of federal funding based on student population. So, so I don't.
And is this based on poverty rates?
Yes.
Yeah.
So my school district doesn't have a very low poverty rate, but that means I don't have very much discretion and every money in terms of how I can direct programs.
And again, we're talking about the Camas School District in Southwest Washington.
Correct. And so, so in terms of the difference, I can tell the difference in terms of what I used to be able to have available, and the kinds of programs that I could direct from my chair are less than that. But we also, my particular school district has also been growing. So I've been able to watch my school district be a small district and kind of build its way to a medium school district. And now that enrollment is slowing, that changes our paradigm a little bit. We sort of have a new normal to sort of navigate without the increased enrollment. So,
just to be clear, are you seeing declining enrollment at this point, or just a slowing growth?
Camas is seeing a slowing enrollment, but that story differs across our state. And
there are certainly districts that are losing enrollment, losing students, and that has major implications for the budget.
Yeah, so I feel like I felt the increase after McCleary. I noticed that, though some of those structures were meant to fade away. We also noticed when some of the regionalization faded away from my school district.
And that was money the state was putting in to sort of in theory, even out, right?
Right, and it was always a part of the plan that it would be temporary, and it systematically exited. We've noticed the difference with our levy funds and what we can do at a local level versus how much our levy funds sometimes need to subsidize the basic education, special education, for example. So, and I feel the high expectations of our community. I feel the needs of our kids increasing and the needs of their social emotional learning needs without necessarily the resources to address. Sometimes we're not teaching the kids who were in our school 10 years ago. We're teaching the kids now.
Right.
And sometimes the funding, isn't always keeping up to pace, again, with the costs of things.
If I were a newer principal watching this interview, I would want to know what advice can you impart? What do you know now that you didn't know when you started, so that I can skip a few mistakes along the way?
Right. I get just the privilege of mentoring some new principals, which is one of the favorite things I get to do. And so I think some of that advice is that the pressures are immense to be an expert the day you walk in the door, to be the expert at building culture, to know everything there is about establishing systems, to be able to be the expert in learning. And nobody has it all figured out right away. So giving somebody first to give themselves the grace it takes to understand a system. But it can feel very lonely, especially at the elementary level that often don't have assistants or other people on your team. My advice would be to reach out to others. You're not the only one that feels that way or are facing those challenges, but to seek out a network. We're so lucky in our state to have a strong Washington Associate Principals group that is there for us if we ask. So I would just give a lot of encouragement to lean into people's strengths. You are enough. You are enough, and to just keep working and focusing on student-centered decisions and seek out help when you need it.
Is there anything you are doing differently today or in recent years as principal as compared to earlier in your principal career?
I think part of being able to be there a while allows me to layer, right? I have some systems that are in place that are working for us. I don't need to spend time developing those, which frees up some capacity to do some other things. I'm very involved in student leadership. I advise the student leadership because it's something I get to do because I love it. It's the best meeting I have all week is with the students. I think that I've definitely gotten better at understanding how things that I can do to impact school culture, things that I can do to make the school feel welcoming, activities that I can do. I spend a lot of time with our parents. They are key to our success, and they invest so much in our school, at least in my experience where I am. And so I've been able to, I think because of my longevity and my experience, I've been able to leverage more people being involved in our school and doing things that can create that feeling of welcome that we want for all students.
I want to drill down a little bit on the student leadership concept, because it's also something Blair Penry, the Teacher of the Year, mentioned when I asked her what is something schools could do better. And she said they could do better of incorporating students into how the buildings operate and what's going on in school, but it also takes time and energy and resources, which can hold back those efforts. How do you define student leadership? What does that look like at the elementary school level? And since this seems to be an emerging theme, at least in these two interviews, why is it so important?
I think that's something I'm proud of our profession, that we really have changed our paradigm about the role students play in their own education, and that they can teach us so much about how to educate them better. We have to learn how to listen. We have to learn how to take that information in, how to prompt to be able to get that information. And that's true even at the elementary level. So I have like a principal advisory group. We've invented some techniques to do a lot more student voting, just to get student voice, and first for students to understand that their voice matters, their voice is important, that it is added value to serving, and that's at every level. I think for us at the elementary, student leadership, sort of like it was for me, part of it is helping students to frame it. Maybe in elementary we called it class helper, but if you call them a leader, that changes how they see themselves. That changes their thoughts about what they're capable, and that they contribute, and that this is their school. And I believe, in my experience, that I have so many examples of ways that has increased their feeling of belonging, their feeling of acceptance. So I find ways for students not to just serve on a traditional student council, so to speak, but to be ambassadors to when guests come, to support to be helpers in the office and the library, and to be mentors to each other. We have a buddy system where older students' classrooms are paired with younger students' classrooms, and that cross-aids mentorship, that I think it helps a student understand what they bring to the table. And I think as educators, we've really grown in our belief that that is true, and that we can learn a lot from our students. But we're trying to find the ways to make that happen most effectively.
Do you agree that when resources are constrained, it can be harder to incorporate these student leadership elements into a building?
Well, I think some of it is just having the vision for that. That definitely was a theme at some of the state conferences and national conferences I went to this summer. Everybody's trying to figure out, like, I want to do that. How do I do that? What does it look like? What are some examples of schools that are doing it? So I think that it's growing, and I think we'll see it grow rapidly, because there's definitely an interest amongst other principals and leaders to look to our students as a voice that is important.
I want to ask you about COVID and how it's a little different conversation at an elementary level than middle and high school, where we're wondering about kind of the lasting effects of kids who had to go remote in the middle of their educational experience. What are you noticing about the kids coming into elementary school these days who may have missed out, for instance, on preschool or had that interrupted? Are there signs of sort of lasting effects or consequences?
Yeah, I mean, it seems so long ago, and yet it wasn't, right? That we all went through that together. That impacted our entire society, not just kids. I think we're still discovering the ways that impacted kids, but we noticed some really interesting things. I mean, a challenge in elementary school in our state and across our country, it's not unique to Washington, is that readiness for kindergarten. You know, we just watched the Olympics, where they got ready to run a big, long race, and everyone started on the starting line at the same spot. That's not what necessarily kids get when they come to kindergarten. They don't all start in the same spot. And I think COVID just emphasized those different opportunities that kids had. And we can tell in those early, kindergarten months who's come from a preschool and who's had those experiences to interact with others in those ways or thinks of themselves as a learner, whereas other kids need a lot more support. So I would say we did see that in a heightened way. Some other things that were interesting that we saw once kids returned, we saw some reading and spelling errors that we had not noticed before, and we think it's because our mouths were covered up. That I think that we had lost just the value of how much we learn from watching how sounds are made and how vocabulary is formed in the mouth, and so we think that had an impact, and we definitely saw an impact on students' writing. While we were able to do, I think, more than the secondary schools with online learning, more kids were there with their camera on, participating to some degree, but be able to teach kids to write and form letters, and we still see that lasting. And then the last piece that we saw was just students, there were differences in their abilities to interact with each other and their interest in interacting with each other. We saw like students' self-help skills weren't as strong. Their problem-solving abilities, I think they were, my theory that, they had not as many opportunities to solve problems themselves because they were, in a limited space and their parent was right there if they were the lucky ones, and others were just doing the best they could. But we still, I just would say, are working on supporting kids' social interactions as well as their academics.
But so going back to sort of what additional resources would be helpful at the elementary school level in this state, obviously you've talked about special education, but in light of some of the things you're observing, I'm curious about, is it most important to you to try to get class sizes smaller? Are there some additional resources or help that's needed in the building? If you could just write the prescription or tell the budget writers, I need these 3 things.
Yeah, I mean,
understanding, as I said to Blair Penry, there's no fast solutions, no silver bullets.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that it does help our K-12 systems when our early childhood programs and access are strong, so that more kids can start on the starting line.
The pre-K
programs, programs, I think, are important. We are really embarking on, education has changed since I was in the classroom, in that the initiative would be called MTSS, or multi-tiered systems of support. This idea that not all kids need the same. And yet, so how can I, as one person, try to meet the needs of the core group of students and layer on additional interventions and supports for students that just need that extra to level the playing field or get them what they need. And then there's students that need a much more intense level. And we're asking the teacher to do all 3 of those things at the same time, in the same day, sometimes in the same lesson. Smaller class size certainly make that more possible. And just having a small class size isn't the magic bean. I've seen people who taught a small class the same way they taught a big class and didn't see the results. But with where we're going it's very difficult to employ the same strategy you can do with a class size of 18 or 22 to try to replicate with a class of 30. There's just not the capacity to pull it off. So I would say that investment in lower class size, in partnership with the additional professional development about how to provide multi-tiered systems of support that are weaved in, is the way to get kids' needs met.
What about the role of para-educators and other sort of the ancillary folks that maybe are supporting the classroom teacher?
That's one of the things I would like to compliment our state on, and I think that that's something that's working, is the investment they've made in our paraeducators in recent years. So they've invested specifically in paraeducators that are instructional support and making sure that they have training. They're often the people that are with our students who need the most intensity or are the most vulnerable, and in previous had lacked that extra training. So Washington now ensures and requires that that's available. So I think that that's helping us leverage and is in the right direction. I do think that I have seen magic happen when a teacher had a paraeducator at their discretion. We were able to pull that off for a very short time when we went from half-day kindergarten to full-day kindergarten. And that teacher being able to leverage individualized support with what they could provide and then what they could direct the para to provide. So I think that if lowering class sizes isn't possible, inventing new school spaces to lower class size isn't possible, giving teachers more discretion at having a paraeducator to leverage what they can do and leverage their expertise would be money well spent and could also get us closer to the ability to individualize for students.
I want to, before we go to break, ask you about a theme with our conversation last week, which I know you had an opportunity to watch with Blair Penry, which was about reaching kids who have historically been marginalized. She spoke a lot about having a diverse core of teachers that are reflective of the diversity of the student body and how hard it is to recruit and retain teachers to begin with, much less a diverse group of teachers. What are your thoughts on, you talked about how not all kids show up at the same starting mark, on reaching those traditionally marginalized kids and on building more diversity into the teacher corps?
Yeah, I think, that's a weak spot. It's definitely a weak spot in my school, that to have a teaching staff that reflects the diversity of students. Yeah. We know that students benefit when they see themselves in their school, when the school is a window to others, but also a mirror of themselves, and that it assists in their ability to feel accepted, assists in their ability to be understood. And so, I think, how do we recruit more teachers? We need to make it be a job that people are interested in, a job people see themselves in. I think that more students that see someone like them who are diverse in a teaching role, the more they'll see themselves, and it will be a positive spiral, see themselves as future teachers. But something I can control in my building is to make sure that my school is a place where not only students belong, but staff feel like they belong, where we feel hope in our work, where we feel joy, where we feel connected and supported, so that we can retain staff. We can make our schools be a place where people want to come, so we can recruit a more diverse workforce, because it is important, and I think that it matters in the achievement of our students.
What is your overall observation as we speak now about, because we talked with Blair Penry about the pipeline of new teachers coming in and enrollment in teacher training programs. Are you having a harder time these days or an easier time hiring teachers?
I think that part of it depends on the time of year, right? That when you have a school where people want to come, you can find educators, and then it gets into the last minute. And then, unfortunately, right now, teachers are available because districts around us have had to go through some serious cuts. That's not the way we want to grow our profession. Yeah. And so I think that this next generation doesn't see teaching as favorable as a profession as we maybe once did. Yeah. That it's hard to find a work-life balance sometimes when you're doing this job with all your heart and all your time. And
I have to say, I didn't say this to Blair Penry, but a lot of people watching may say, yeah, but summer's off, not principals.
Well, no, but also,
but
teachers
is there a misnomer there?
There is a misunderstanding about that. It's so simplified. Teachers are doing additional training. Teachers do overtime all year long to be able to really meet the needs of their students. And so I think that there is a rejuvenation that happens in the summer that's important, but there's also trainings and expectations for further learning and different things like that. So I don't think anybody who's close to the profession and walks in the shoes thinks I do this job so I can have summers
or that
off.
there's a whole lot of
But I would echo that in the principalship, I would say we're also struggling, particularly with the Hispanic folks being in the pipeline to be principals. And part of that, I think, is the amount of support that we give people as they're entering the profession, the amount of time they get in their internships and the amount of time they get in that mentoring opportunity. So one of the ways to do that is to try to make the pathway be shorter and faster, but that doesn't always set up people to be successful when they start the career, because it's a difficult job. It's the best job, and it is not the easiest job.
Okay, let's just take a brief break. When we return, we continue our in-depth conversation with Elementary Principal of the Year, Dr. Cathy Sork. Back after this.
Teach with TVW is diving headfirst into the 2024 elections. Throughout this exciting election season, we will be producing videos that educate and empower you to get engaged in the electoral process.
And welcome back to Inside Olympia. Joining me once again is Washington's Elementary School Principal of the Year, Dr. Cathy Sork. And I want to also reference something else that Blair Penry said last week, which was, and this kind of references back to your point about the profession and the workload. And she talked about the gift of time. And so the question on my mind is, how do we give teachers more time to prepare, to think, to be creative, so that they're not just going?
You know, that's a great question. I wish I had the full answer. You know, I think that teachers, you know, it takes a lot to be in front of kids and to be prepared.
It's exhausting.
And to make sure,
It's almost like you have to get in shape to do it, because it's like standing up. I don't think people often realize, like public speaking, standing up in front of people, that drains you.
Right. And like I said, they're amazing. You know, I encourage people to get an understanding of what's happening in our classroom and to be able to talk to teachers that they know. They work miracles. And so finding time is challenging because it takes a lot to keep the current ship going, right, and keep the plane flying. But then how do we get to be innovative? And that's where, you know, thinking outside the box, I'd love to see, teacher groups where they, you know, people could get some time, maybe a sabbatical year where they are a planner, they're an innovator, they're a thinker. So how do we change the profession with creative ideas while you're in the trench? But one of the initiatives that I try to do in my building that we've had some great feedback on is the opportunity for teachers to learn from each other. There is so much expertise in each of our buildings, and yet the school is built often to be a silo where a teacher is just in their own room. Right. So opportunities for teachers to see each other teach, to learn from each other. Our professional learning communities is a help, but finding time in a regular school work week is really challenging for them to be able to do the collaboration that would be necessary to take us further. But there's a lot of really good work happening now. There's a lot of great innovation happening now. I would wish that got more attention sometimes in the headlines and the blurbs, because so our schools are doing a lot of great things for kids.
Well, let's click through some of the kind of hot topic issues that we're seeing discussed in this state and nationally about public schools these days. One question I have for you is about student behavior and mental health. What are you noticing at the elementary school level, whether that's related or not to COVID, but just we hear so much about middle school and high school kids, especially girls, social media impacts. Again, I think the conversation probably is different for the younger students, but what are you noticing?
Yeah, students come to school with a lot of worries. Students come to school needing more skills. In fact, our state of Washington, in addition to math skills and science skills and reading skills, we have social emotional skill standards so we incorporate that into part of our teaching. Now, we didn't get more time to do that. We needed to do it in the time that we have, but we know that a student needs to have the ability to be aware of themselves, to self-regulate, and to get themselves in a place that they can be an effective learner. So spending time doing that gets us further down the road with the academic achievements and those things. But that wasn't a part of our curriculum, right, that we did before. We've always helped kids that we see in need, but we see kids that come to school needing to learn how to interact positively with each other at times. We also, though, have learned to view differently. We approach kids' behavior with greater curiosity than we used to before in my many years, where what's that communication that behavior represents? What is that student telling us about what they need, or about what they've experienced, or about what skill deficit that they might have? It's not just a kid who's coming to school and misbehaving a lot of times. And so us being able to identify the why behind behavior, we can do a much better job of approaching that through the lens of coaching. And I think elementary is such a natural time where behavior is teaching. And that's a developmentally appropriate thing to do with students our age. But for all of us, being able to look closer at the reasons behind what's happening can help us address students, because student behavior can be very challenging, it can be very disruptive to the environment, and it can be very consuming sometimes for educators who have a lot of goals of what they're trying to accomplish.
Well, that gets to the next question I wanted to ask you about, which was ensuring fair disciplinary practices and ensuring that the practices aren't disparate, and sort of evolving thinking around that.
I think we've grown a lot in looking at the data, really looking at what has our practice been traditionally, what outcomes have come of that, and we've wanted to see change, and I think those are in process. I think we've done a lot to look at that differently, to see the role that we're playing or the role that our bias could be playing to have more equitable outcomes for students. Looking at discipline through restorative practices is something that I believe in and I feel like is becoming much more prevalent in our state, where, again, it's a teaching opportunity. It's an opportunity for students to try to gain the perspective of others, to try to understand that their behavior has consequences to others and has consequences to themselves. And giving them that opportunity to understand the harm that they might have caused somebody or a situation, and then being a part of how are you going to restore that? How are you going to make that right? You made a mistake. What can you do? Is more than just assigning consequences that might have been the case before. It's more than a punishment. It's about helping somebody to do the best that they can and to teach them how do they make things right if something has gone wrong.
Got to ask you about cell phones in schools, even though it feels a little weird to ask an elementary school principal
You'd
about
be
this.
surprised how many of our students have cell phones. I do think it's a little easier for us to implement practices that have been in place for a lot of school districts, which is in our case to keep them in your backpack. Families.
Is that a new policy?
That's not a new policy. Policies around not wanting to distract an environment, not wanting to, violate the privacy of students and things that can happen when you have those kind of devices have been in place, but can be challenging to enforce. In elementary, there's also the form of watches, and many of those devices are there because they put parents at ease of knowing how to communicate with their student. But I think that the attention to cell phones in our state right now is important. It's a conversation to be having. That I do think that particularly at the grades beyond us, they can be very distracting to an environment. I think that it's a healthy situation for kids to be able to set it down and not just be defined by having a social media device in their hand. I think that it can have a lot of negative impact on a student's self-esteem and their understanding of how we interact. And so I like the idea that we're of the lean to set them more aside. They're important tools, and they're tools that will continue to be a part of students' lives, and they need to learn how to use them appropriately. But right now, I think they're getting in the way sometimes of students getting the most they can out of a classroom and their school day. And so I'm looking forward to seeing some districts have kind of gone ahead. And I think our whole state, through the encouragement of Chris Reichtel, our superintendent, to look at those policies. Our particular school district in Camas has pledged to look at our policy and really see what we think might be best for kids and learning moving forward. But not as much of a daily issue at my elementary school.
Right. Just in the past week, there's been a high-profile school shooting in Georgia. This happened at a high school right at the beginning of the school year. And, every time this happens, the people are up in arms. They're trying to figure out what can we do about this? Why does this keep happening? No one principal, no one school can solve this problem. But as a school principal, especially at the elementary school level, when you're thinking about building safety, student safety, the anxiety of parents who maybe want to contact their kids because they're worried in this day and age about what happens in schools. Those events, that there's no way to make sense of them. It's difficult to process them even from far away, and brings us all back to our own and communities, our own schools. Part of the way that we address and respond is to are we following as many best practices and preventative safety protocols? Are we, do staff know what to do? Do we have relationships with our local law enforcement? Are we practicing in ways that are developmentally appropriate? So anytime, an event, just a tragedy like that happens, it does cause us to look at our, are we doing everything we can to prepare for something that we hope we never, ever use. Our families, we can feel it in our families. I know I make a special point to make sure I'm out at the drop-off area and that parents can see me and approach me. And parents often have questions and feelings and are processing things that they've seen happen in other places. But we try to be transparent with our families about the protocols and procedures that we've put in place. We take very seriously our
adults having a badge. We do have a buzz-in system, to try to make sure that our schools are the safest that they can be. But, but it's unfortunate that those are things that we are having to put time and energy into, and are just heartbreaking that communities have had to go through that.
Change gears, and I want to ask you something I didn't ask Blair Penry, but is very much on my mind, is how artificial intelligence might affect the teaching and education profession. I'm envisioning it maybe at the higher grade levels, but have you thought about this? Have you experimented at all? Is it a topic of conversation when you go to these national conferences?
Absolutely, it is. It is something that people have a great curiosity about. Some front runners are people that are sort of early adopters are trying and are now talking about their experiences. I'm excited at it as a tool. I think, we had a chance to hear from a public speaker at the National Principals Conference, Sal Khan, who's an innovator in education online technology. And so he gave me some great insights to it, that it can be a tool that could help teachers. It could help teachers to have the best lesson plan ideas at their fingertips. It can help them to craft things, to spend their time in a way that puts their energy on their expertise. Well, maybe something else handles some of the more busy work. So right now it's a thing with potential, but it's hard to know where it's going to go. I was able to see a demonstration of the difference between asking like ChatGPT for help, if you were a student needing help with something, versus the potential that AI really has to be a coach. Do I think it's going to replace teachers? I do not. I think that any of this technology is a tool that needs a human in the front, asking of it what is necessary, setting the parameters, giving it the information, and then a human at the back at the end, making sure it's a match. So I think that it's exciting. I think that it does have the ability to support teachers, support students. I think it's going to level the playing field when it comes to writing. Writing has been something that was shared with me at this national conference, that sometimes is a barrier for people. They have incredible ideas, but they're not able to get it down on paper to bring that forward, and maybe that keeps them from advancing their thoughts and ideas, and maybe I can help remove that barrier. So right now it's a curiosity and it's a dabbling, but it's definitely, a few years from now, where I think we'll have a lot more insight as to the cautions around it, as well as the just potential of how it might support.
Do you think it will change the job of teachers? You mentioned the term coach, and Chris Rakedall, the state superintendent, talked about this too, that potentially, and again, I don't know if this would be so true at the lower grades, but students might be more able to work at their own pace with AI kind of guiding them, and then teachers coming in more as coaches. And I wonder if a revolutionary change in the actual practice of teaching is in the offing.
I don't think I'm ready to jump that far. I think now it's just something that has potential. But again, it's not going to replace a human being with a student, in my opinion. But we'll just watch and see how it's going to go.
Nobody's suggesting that yet.
But we've talked about, how do you find more time? How do you build more capacity for one person to have greater influence? Maybe it can help accentuate that. But so I think we need to be open to it and see what we can learn from it. But I think this is an exciting time and a cautious time, I think, as we just watch those things play out for the role it plays in student learning.
I want to ask some of these questions that my educator friend suggested. And I asked Blair Penry this as well. What's one thing that you believe all schools can do well but are not prioritizing?
She answered and spoke about student voice, and I think that's an excellent response. I think that I think we're on our way. So I would say the prioritizing is there, but we're on our way and being more able to deliver education at multiple tiers at the same time. I think that's professional development people are doing right now, learning from each other. But as a teacher who faces a classroom of 25 students, they need so many different things. And so trying to learn how to be one person or one system that's trying to deliver all of those things is the direction we're going, and we still have a ways to go. before we get there.
Well, and that gets to, and I think you've, in some respects, answered this, but let me directly ask, what is the biggest challenge that keeps more schools from doing this one thing well, if that is incorporating students into the leadership environment, of the building more, or just reaching students kind of individually where they're at when you're looking at a classroom of 18, 25, 30 students,
Yeah.
and you're one teacher?
Yeah, I think that my honest answer is that we're trying to add more things to the plate, and the plate is really full. Right, so even people that have just interest and passion, they're trying to reach to these new things, but there's a lot on the plate, and so trying to be able to do both at the same time, right? Meet the needs of who's right in front of me today, and be able to dream and think of new things, and we can't keep adding to the plate. Sometimes some things need to come off the plate, and sometimes that's leadership that I think that I'm challenged to provide, is how do I help teachers prioritize that so they can have the capacity to stretch and get into these practices that we believe in, but sometimes you're stuck in the trench and it's hard to find where's the time to get to those things.
Is there something that we should really hold on to as sacred about the way that we educate kids, and is there something that we should be very willing to put in the dustbin and say, you served us well, but we're moving on from that?
Well, I think, I've been at all the levels. Elementary is just such a hopeful place. It's just, but every student all the way through our system is a student with great potential. And being able to just continually to believe it's possible, right? To be able to meet the needs of all these students, even if I didn't get to everything and do it as perfectly as I would like, or I'm still, that student's still heavy on my mind tonight. It's possible, right? And being able to hold on to that. The public has a really interesting relationship with schools in that people went to school. So that often makes them sort of think maybe they know about schools. And so I think sometimes there's also a need to let go of the way that the school was that you went to, and to have greater openness to that school can look different, and that the way that things our kids focusing on, or we still see some of those kind of old ways of thinking. For example, if a student's absent and they'll say, well, can you just give me the work they missed? Education isn't that simple anymore. It's not a worksheet I can just provide from home and they're ready to go and they're back caught up with their friends. That the education that kids are engaged in today is active and hands-on and involved with student discourse all the way down to kindergarten. It's interaction in the moment. Teachers making decisions. They're not following blindly this textbook and they're on this workbook page. That just isn't what it looks like anymore. And when you're not there, you're missing it. So I think that this kind of it's hard to let go of education the way I went to school many years ago, but I think that's something we could let go of more, to just be open to new ways and what the education of kids really look like now.
You have an opportunity to potentially reach policymakers and budget writers in this capacity as elementary principal of the year, and you talked about the workload and what's expected always kind of growing, and not necessarily more resources to do that work. What is your main message to people who write the budgets for public schools in the state and enact the policies that then you and your staff have to implement?
Well, I think that, principals, like we said, can make a big difference in their school. But the average principal in our state's working 6 and 7 days. We're working 60 or more hours. That's hard to sustain and have a work-life balance. So continuing to support additional leadership, assistant principals. The prototypical school model is a funding formula. It's not necessarily a staffing formula. The staffing costs aren't necessarily a match. I'm not an expert in that area, but so I would say continuing to understand and keep in mind as a legislature the dream you have for kids, and then do what you can to make sure that you have the resources to back that up, and so that we can have an equitable access for each and every kid in our state. That's been an important part of our state in its history. We're right across the river from Oregon, so we get to see close by how states do things differently. I'm so glad to be in the state of Washington. Our lawmakers have a tough job, but I do believe that our state understands that it is in the benefit of our entire state to have a strong public education system, and that many of the problems that we deal with as a society, when we start kids on a strong foundation, that helps. We're the profession that leads to all other professions. So I would say just continuing to try to lean into the vision we have for what we want for kids, and then to try to provide the support to help make that happen with real people doing it in the trenches, which can be, they have a very difficult job to try to weigh all those things. I would advise a lawmaker to have every lawmaker have a principal buddy. That was an idea that was shared with me that I really appreciated, so that every lawmaker could get a principal on the line and go, tell me about this. What does this mean? What, just get there. It's hard to do, to stay in touch with what that's really like. But we're all in this together. We all want the same thing. We want educated kids who are accepted and welcomed in their schools and are ready to be productive citizens. And we'll just keep working together to make that happen.
I don't know how much it's happening in Washington state, but clearly if you look across the country, public education has been politicized, and there is a real movement to acceleration of school voucher programs, especially in Republican-led states. There's obviously been culture wars over transgender students, diversity, equity, inclusion programs and efforts. Blair Penry talked about this, sort of the politicization of education. Not a new thing, probably comes in waves and ebbs and flows, but what are your thoughts or observations about that sort of more national climate?
Yeah, I'm concerned at sometimes the messaging is too narrow. Like, where's the stories about the positive things that are happening, which are so much bigger sometimes than the negative one-off kind of story that gets the attention, or the individual situation that gets the attention. But I think that, again, even through the politics, there's a common ground to be had that we want all kids to be successful. I don't think there's anybody in our country that wouldn't say they don't want all kids to be successful. And so I think sometimes the politics and things can get in the way of that. I believe that some school choice is just a wonderful thing for some kids, that not all kids are the same. They're not widgets. They don't all learn the same way. But I haven't seen the research in vouchers and charter schools being the magic thing that's going to fix it. I think a strong public school education is important for our society, that brings us together, that teaches us how to be together and be with people. I worry about isolating ourselves, segregating ourselves into schools that are just one way or just this way. So I hope that those politics and things that luckily can feel far away sometimes from my elementary school, but I just want to find common ground around kids, and that we're doing our best for kids. We have amazing people who show up every day to do that. And some of that stuff can be distracting to that message, and I don't think is it always fair representation of what's happening in our schools.
Just in the less than 2 minutes we have left, I know you've mentioned mentoring other principals. You've done a lot of work with the Washington State Association of Principals. What is that work, both around mentorship but also around student leadership? What does that work look like? You're doing this beyond your 60 hours a week at your own school.
Yeah.
But what's that work look like?
I've had the wonderful opportunity to receive some training, and then to be able to be assigned new principals that are not in my district but are in my local area. And I learned so much about myself. I learned so many new ideas, helping new principals find their way or tackle and navigate issues. So often it's just a platform to be able to talk to a neutral person, to help have a sounding board, to help navigate. This is a very difficult job. There's a lot of pressures on principals.
And it's a little lonely at the top.
It absolutely is. So
And
I
you
think
talked
that
about silos.
networking-
You're also siloed by building.
Absolutely. So I think being a school leader is that giving that opportunity to network, giving people that encouragement and that guidance of, like, I've been there before, and is just really important for people to feel like that they're doing a good job, that they are capable of this job, and that they are doing great things for kids, because it's a tall order, and we have very high expectations for ourselves, and that's part of what makes it good. But the job's like water; it'll fill as much space as you give it.
Yeah. I'm going to stop you there. Dr. Cathy Sork, the principal at Dorothy Fox Elementary School in Camas, Washington, and Washington State's Elementary School Principal of the Year. Again, congratulations, and thanks for the interview.
Thanks so much.
Good to see you, and thank you for watching Inside Olympia. We'll see you again next week.